Traditions and culture shape who we are. Let's expand our horizons over a cup of tea. This is a Candy Factory Convo. Get Cultured with Timbrel Kiati.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Get Cultured. Today I have a very special guest on the show. Honestly, every day seems like a special guest, but today I actually have Christine Kalleeny, and she is actually a professor of Arabic at Franklin and Marshall. And so I'd like to welcome Christine on the show. Hi, Christine.
Hello, Timbrel.
How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and I love how you said my name.
Is it the right way?
Yeah, the phonetics, the way you pronounce it is beautiful. Thank you.
Your name is very musical.
Yes, it is. Not many people know that, so thanks for knowing that. Welcome to Get Cultured. I am super, super excited to have you on the show, and just all the background knowledge you're going to share today. Before I ask, I know to usually share a cup of tea, which I know you do have a cup of tea there with you, but Egypt is more of a coffee country?
Actually, it's both. It's a tea and a coffee. So people treat tea like strong, like a nice strong cup of tea with lots of sugar as like their wind down, I need to relax, or their post-dinner drink.
Okay.
So yeah, the culture is very tea oriented. And there are a lot of varieties in the way people prepare tea, but honestly, the most common is really just a strong Lipton.
Okay.
Honestly, it used to be that people would boil the tea leaves and for a long, like over the fire and then add mint, like fresh mint leaves is very popular. But people most commonly, if you just go to a cafe, they're just going to give you Lipton.
Yeah, got it. And then they have the Lipton flavors, like the lemon flavor, the mint.
But people usually don't do flavors. They just do the tea, black tea, and then it's shay, similar to chai, like in India. Because that's probably the origin of the word, actually. So shay bin na'na is tea with fresh mint, lots of fresh mint. That's really good with sugar. And there's also like tea with cloves. There's different ways to have tea in Egypt, but the most common is just tea or tea with mint, with shay bin na'na. And then it is a coffee culture as well, because of the Ottoman influence. So the Turkish coffee or Arabic coffee, we usually refer to it as Turkish coffee, and it's really delicious. It's really finely ground coffee, finer than espresso, and you prepare it over I think I just dropped over a fire or over the stove until it rises and it forms like a sort of, we call it a wish, like a face, like a cream foam. And then people either drink it with or without sugar. There's never any milk added. Very seldomly would anyone have milk in it. And there's sometimes you can get coffee ground with cardamom. They would ground the coffee with cardamom or other spices. And so you can actually have it that way as well. And it's really delicious. So those are the two main drinks in Egypt that are not herbal or not cold drinks. Yeah.
I also know, this is like kind of a fun fact, I don't know how if it's real or not, but my friend told me in Turkey, and they actually tell people's future by looking at the the coffee grounds after you drink it. You're supposed to move it around. I don't know if it's real or not, but I think it's kind of cool.
It is absolutely a practice in Egypt. They do that actually all over the Arab world, where they do drink this coffee. So if you usually they have it in little tiny cups. And when you finish your coffee, you'll notice there's a film, very thick, kind of muddy residue at the bottom, and that's the coffee grinds, because again, they're not filtered when you drink them. So what happens is you tip it over if you want to tell the fortune, and it's called qarat al-fingan. Baqra al-fingan. Fingan meaning the cup of coffee. So you're reading the fingan, you're reading the coffee cup, and what happens is when you turn it over, it forms a very unique pattern on the cup, unique to each drinker, and then people may pretend to read the future or actually know how.
Depending.
And can tell your future by the lines and kind of almost like snowflake patterns. I actually did this activity with my students a couple of years ago before COVID. I would bring coffee to the classroom and everybody was reading each other's.
That's so cool.
So it's a very common, fun practice that people do.
I love learning that. My friend, he's Egyptian, and he told me about that, and I was like, if that's all it takes to read my future, like I'm in.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I want to like share your story and who you are with the world. I think it's really important. You are Coptic Orthodox Egyptian, which is it's a very interesting culture in another very interesting culture. So you have just a lot of interesting culture about you, really. So I really want to start. Let's try to take this slow to kind of make sense of everything. You are Egyptian. Were you born in Egypt or were you born in America?
I was born in the U.S. I was born in New Jersey.
Okay.
And my parents are from Cairo.
Okay.
And still, I would say the majority of my extended family still lives in Cairo, but I have some family in the U.S. And I grew up going to Egypt almost, I would say not almost, every year of my life. I spent a full summer in Egypt until I was in college. And even beyond that, I was visiting, but maybe not every year. And so I have a very close tie to my family there. And I would say that's why I speak Arabic, or I grew up speaking Arabic, largely because I had to, because when I went to Egypt, that's the opportunity that I had to be able to absorb the language. So yeah.
Is Arabic the only language spoken in Egypt?
No, it is the main official language, of course. Okay. And it's English would be the second. And then after that would be French.
Oh, French.
Yeah.
So
minority of educated speakers would know French, but English would be the secondary because of the British occupation in Egypt. And of course, France had a presence in Egypt as well, but it was much earlier.
That's so interesting. So in school, you had to learn Arabic and English, I'm guessing. Well, if you were in Egypt.
I grew up here, so I learned Arabic from being around my family, but I formally learned how to read and write first with my mother, and then in grad school here is where I really kind of took it seriously, because something that many people don't realize is that Arabic has more than one register. So essentially, all the so-called Arabic countries, Arabic-speaking countries, and of course by that I don't mean Muslim countries or Islamic. That's to be distinguished from that, even though all Arabic countries are essentially Muslim countries. Their language is Arabic, and that's the mode of communication. That's the code, is what we call modern standard Arabic, which is related to the language of the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. Yeah. It's kind of a descendant of that formal Arabic register. But people don't speak modern standard Arabic. It's something we use to read and write. It's something they use to disseminate news channels, or that you would open a newspaper and that's what you're reading. But people speak dialect. And dialect, there are many of them. There are many variations of Arabic depending on the region. Even in one country, there can be more than one regional dialect. So Egypt has a very distinguished one called Masri, and that's what I grew up speaking. Okay. But I did not necessarily, you don't read and write in Masri. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So Lebanon has a dialect shared with, very similar to the one in Syria and in Jordan and in Palestine. The Gulf countries have a common dialect. The Maghreb in North Africa have a common, kind of common dialect, meaning Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. There's commonalities, but with differences. So they're like dialect families.
Can you tell where a person is from by their dialect right away?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Like kind of like
familiar.
Like the southern draw in in America compared to like the Jersey accent, it's very different. Is it the same way, or is it just words are completely different?
Both. So Egyptian dialect is the most widely understood dialect by other Arabs from other countries because of like the sort of Egyptian Hollywood. So I call it the Egyptian Hollywood. It's not Hollywood, but Egypt, was very important in film,
like Bollywood.
And still is. Exactly. Egypt is kind of like the center for disseminating film, music, media, all that stuff, and still is. Yeah. And then after that, Lebanon. So those dialects associated with Lebanese, and Egyptian are probably the most widely understood. Egyptian still being the most.
Okay.
So like if you go to Morocco, chances are an Egyptian is not going to know how to emulate a Moroccan person speaking Darija,
Okay.
which is a beautiful dialect, but lesser known and lesser understood by the majority of Arabs. But a Moroccan will be able to very often emulate an Egyptian because he or she grew up watching the movie.
Yeah. That's so
It's kind of unfair.
Yeah.
The unfair thing that Egyptians can be more widely understood and they don't really feel like they have to necessarily speak or talk the talk of other dialects. Others can and do, and often willingly, just because it's fun for them. Because it's like, oh, I grew up watching this great actor and this great movie. So, and that goes for music, that goes for everything. But in this country, in the US, there's so many Lebanese, so many Syrians, so many Jordanians, and Egyptians. So it's very important that people who want to learn Arabic learn a dialect, not just so that they can actually talk to other people from the Arab world in a language that's living, because modern standard is not a living language per se, but also because, more likely you have like a roommate, a neighbor, a friend, somebody down the street, whatever, who's from Lebanon, who's from Syria, who's from Jordan, who may be from Morocco or from Egypt.
Yeah.
And so when I teach Arabic, for example, I at Franklin and Marshall, I actually teach dialect in addition
That's
to.
so interesting.
I teach Egyptian because I know it well and because it's so common.
So I have to ask you some more questions because I know there's like so many things I want to ask. Another question I have for you is Coptic Orthodox. That is what you are, and that is like kind of a culture of its own in Egypt. Can you explain the Coptic Orthodox culture to me?
Yes, I will do my best.
In the sense, like, where did it begin? I mean, people think of Egypt, they think of the pyramids, and they think of the, mummy and King Tut and, all these things, but there's so much more in the Egyptian culture than just that.
Yes, so there's so many layers, as you can see, right, to Arab culture. So you've got the umbrella of Islamic countries, and then underneath the Islamic country bracket, you've got Arabic speaking countries, right, which is where people speak the native language of Arabic. And then underneath that, you have the layer of, obviously, religious identity is very heterogeneous in the Arab world. Most people don't realize that although most Arabs the majority of them may be Muslim, but that's not true, that they are all Muslim, right? So something I like people to understand is that, like Egypt, if you take Egypt, for example, Egypt wasn't always a Muslim country, right? First it was pagan, and then please forgive me on the dates, but sometime
that's okay.
In the Byzantine era, I can't remember now the dates, forgive me, anybody who's an aficionado, there was the Christianization of Egypt very early. This would probably be during the Apostles of Christ era. St. Mark is believed to be the one that Christianized Egypt, or who was first responsible for Christianizing Egypt. And the church established itself in Alexandria.
Okay.
So till this day, the patriarchate of our church, which is called the Coptic Orthodox Church, is in Alexandria.
Okay.
It's located in Alexandria. And there's right now about maybe 10 to 13% of the population in Egypt identifies as Christian. Coptic really is actually derived from the Greek word that means Egyptian. But what it connoted was Egyptian Christian. Because at one time in history, Egypt was all Christian.
Yeah.
So that would be the phase after sort of the predominantly, I guess, pagan, phase. And again, I'm not going to give you dates because I'm not brushed up. But then in the 7th century, when Islam came, then of course Egypt was conquered and Islamicized.
Okay.
There was a heavy tax, the jizya, that was imposed on people. That basically it's like convert or pay. So then that's essentially one of the main ways that people converted to Islam.
Okay.
And in Egypt, and as a result of Islam taking over Egypt, of course the language changed. It used to be Greek and Coptic. Coptic was like ancient Egyptian language with Greek words, essentially. And it's not a spoken language. It's only used liturgically now, meaning in the Mass. The service is often in Coptic, combination of Coptic and Arabic.
Now, I have to ask you this because I know a lot of people will be asking because they think hieroglyphics is the only language of Egypt, which is not the case, correct?
Well, hieroglyphics is no longer a language at all. That's spoken, and neither is Coptic, but they are related. The Coptic is kind of like, and again, I'm not an expert in ancient languages, but my understanding of Coptic is that it has its own alphabet, but there's Greek letters in it. Because again, Egypt was Hellenic. There was a Greek culture to Egypt in the Christian era. So there was only one church, actually. It was, I don't know at what point the Coptic Orthodox Church kind of separated from the Roman Empire or the other, which now there's many, as you know, many denominations and sects. There's the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, and then there's the Catholic. But at one time, they were all one church.
Okay.
And then they split off and Egypt had its own domain. Yeah. And I'm not going to get into the theological reasons.
I really just want to know, like, honestly, when you talk about being Coptic Orthodox in a culture in Egypt that's mostly, as we found out, Islam, what is that like? Like, are there certain aspects that you take from Islam because it's been part of the culture, or has it just been Coptic Orthodox for thousands of years, or however long, or you know what I mean? Has there been a fusion at all because the cultures are so intertwined?
I hesitate. I want to say that in the language that we speak every day, like as Arabic speakers, and this is true for people from other countries as well who speak Arabic, in the Levantine area, for example, there are things we appropriated from the Islamic culture inevitably. Like, for example, the word Allah itself, we use it to refer to God. We don't have a word for God. The Coptic language has a word for God and a word for Jesus. It does, but people don't speak Coptic.
Got it.
So Coptic is used in liturgical services, but essentially we Christians, we who identifies as Christians, whether we're actually Orthodox or Protestant or Catholic, and there are Catholic and Protestant Christians in Egypt who would be lumped under Coptic because they're Christians. These people still use the word Allah to talk about God.
Interesting.
So, but the word Allah even predates Islam.
Wow.
It's an Islamic word for God, of course.
Yeah.
But it predates Islam. It also was used in the region prior to the revelation of Islam.
That's so interesting.
So, but what I wanted to say is that we use a lot of expressions, like, for example, like when we say, like, praise God, like, thank God it's Friday kind of a thing, like, alhamdulillah, we say it all the time, or inshallah, God willing. These are all things that we got from Islam, like Islamic culture.
Yeah.
And it's just used, like, it's just how we talk. Like, it's not even, you think about it. A lot of these expressions, they're not necessarily expressions of piety. They're not. They're kind of norms of the language, of the culture.
And how the cultures have kind of, in the sense, come together.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I think, is really good to know.
Yeah, of course. And there are things that we have, like food in common, everything.
Let's talk about food. I have to ask you about food. What is a very common Egyptian dish or meal that you cook?
Egyptian food is very versatile and diverse, and it reflects like many influences. So like you have like a Turkish influence because we were on, part of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
You have French, you have, there were Italians and Greeks living in Egypt, and they contributed to our culinary heritage. Yeah. So for example, something you will typically find, like I'm just going to, most common is like kufta, like, like grilled meats, which I think you have also in Indian culture.
We do.
Grilled meats, like shish kebab. That's originally Turkish, but it's part of our eating.
Interesting.
Another one, if you go like to someone's house, like even in the US, there'll always be macarona bil bechamel.
I love that stuff. It's so
it's
good.
So good. I know. So but what it is it's actually coming from the Greek pasticcio. And I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing pasticcio correctly. Mm-hmm. Forgive me, my Greek friends. But so it's actually just an Egyptian version of that. It's basically like pasta with a layer of meat, with a layer of bechamel, and it's seasoned, of course, with onions and spices. And my mom's is my favorite, of course.
Of course.
I think she makes the best. And so that's something you can find. There's so much. But I should tell you about the two most classic Egyptian that I would say 2 that are typically Egyptian, and 3 that are shared with other cultures. We have fool.
Okay.
Have you had fool?
No, I haven't.
It's fava beans, and it's a dish that you can eat for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's like the poor man and the rich man's food.
Okay.
And most people in Egypt can't afford meat,
Yeah.
So it's something we eat, and it's basically prepared usually with like olive oil or some other kind of oil sometimes. Onions, garlic, cumin, sometimes hot peppers, and you eat it with pita bread. You can eat it with cheese, with eggs, with pastrami.
Okay.
It's a very versatile dish and it's very delicious. It sounds so like what? Just beans, but it's just amazing. If you think about other cultures that have beans as part of their dish and how delicious that can be. And then the other one is mulukhiyya, which is called, I don't really know what to call it in English, but mulukhiyya is like a green vegetable that's like very finely chopped, like very finely. And it looks like kale or spinach, but it's not either of those things. And it's prepared with like in a stock of either like seafood or chicken, and with spices, and you eat it with rice, and it's very thick. Once it's prepared, it's like nice and thick, and you pour it over rice, and you could dip your bread in it. And it's very hard to explain, but it's in Egypt, we use a lot of garlic and coriander in it, and it's like super delicious, but it's definitely an acquired texture because the texture is viscous. It's like kind of
yeah, that sounds delicious.
Yeah, but it really is a delicious thing. It's my daughter's favorite food, and she's only 3.5.
So talking about the Egyptian culture, what is just one element or one thing that's just very important for the culture for people that you can think of?
Hospitality.
Hospitality.
Manners. Hospitality. When someone visits you, you make them feel at home. You offer them drink, food. You don't insist they leave right away. You try to keep them.
Do people just show up with unannounced?
That's a good question. I think family can. Like I know, but not everybody likes that. I think it depends on the family.
Okay.
Like, but typically, you would be invited to come over. Or if someone does invite themselves, you have to be hospitable. You can't just, and then, when you're a guest too, you have to be considerate of your host. You have to be grateful. You don't like make them work too hard for you, even if, so there's this whole culture of insisting, like if you're a host, you insist that they eat and something to drink. And that's something I actually try to get across to my students because it's not the same here. Like I think in the US, it's like no is no, yes is yes.
Yeah.
Get off my back.
Yeah. Well, my mom's like that. When she serves food, like we'll have people over and they'll be like, that's enough. And she'll still be like, no, you must have more. And, for my mom, it's like, we have to just give them as much as possible. And they're probably like, what is she doing? Like, it's a very cultural thing.
It is. And I think many cultures have that, as you just are showing me. And people don't always understand it. And sometimes they find it annoying. But I mean, even like a common American culture where people are familiar with is Italian, right?
Yeah.
They love to eat. Oh, eat. And it's kind of like that. Like, I guess what you and I are describing.
Yeah.
So it's very important to be hospitable and polite and speak with manners and, like.
Yeah. I have to, so my best friend in college was Egyptian. So I was around her family a lot, which is where I learned a lot about the Egyptian culture and Coptic culture. But there's one thing that I want to know more about, and I think other people would, is when you celebrate, you do something very interesting. And I'd like to know more about this and where this came about and what it means. And when I say this, I'm sure you know what I mean. Like when you do the little, yeah. How, like explain this, and maybe you can do it better than me, and you don't have to do it really loud, but just like kind of explain the meaning and why this is done. Because the first time her mom did this, I was like, what is going on?
It is. It's called Zaghrata.
Okay.
Zaghrata. And it's not unique to Egypt. It's all across the Arab world. And I don't want to say beyond, but maybe. It's something people do at weddings as a sign of happiness, and I have no idea how to emulate it. It's something that involves their tongue, and I've never been able to do it.
Okay.
And not every family does it, by the way.
Okay.
Some families are more reserved and won't do Zaghrata, but yes, it is like a very common thing, and it's a phenomenon. Like it's a cultural phenomenon I want to say unique to Arabs in general, but I'm not entirely sure that it doesn't go beyond that,
Yeah. It's really interesting, and I can't even make the noise. So to everyone that's listening or watching, I think you should Google this.
Yes.
Because it's just a very interesting way of celebrating. And when my best friend, her mom would do this, I'd be like, how is she doing this? And it would be loud. I mean,
Oh, yes.
very loud. Yeah. So, okay. So what's it called again?
Zaghrata. So I think if you were to
Zaghrata.
transliterate it, it would be Zaghrata. You might, if you Googled it,
Zaghrata.
maybe you would,
Okay.
yeah.
So yeah, everyone, please Google this because it's very interesting. I thought it was super interesting. Okay, so so now that I know, the Egyptian culture is about hospitality, can we talk about what it's like being an Egyptian American in America
Oh.
growing up?
Um, there's so many aspects to it. If I'm going to speak about being an Egyptian in general versus being Coptic in particular, because there are some things, I would say, a lot of people just don't know anything about our culture. Maybe I think since 9/11, people have gained some knowledge for sure. But prior to that, which is what I spent most of my childhood experiencing, I mean, people didn't know what I was. They just like, oh, are you Italian? Are
Yeah.
you, I don't know, Spanish? They don't know. And if I said I was from Egypt, unfortunately, I have to say people didn't even know where that was on the map. They didn't realize it's in the north of Africa, that it's politically, part of the Middle East, politically and culturally speaking. So there's just a lot of things I had to always explain to people. I remember when I was growing up, people were like, do you guys still ride camels? I mean, you'd be shocked at the questions that I would get. No, we don't all ride camels. Cairo is a huge city. It's massive, very urbane. There's everything, just like New York. And then the other, and then of course there's always the issue of especially after 9/11, there was this assumption that if you're from Egypt or you're from Morocco or from Tunisia, whatever, you're Muslim. There's just an assumption, which isn't, I mean, you can't blame people if they're not educated in the school systems about that, right?
Yeah.
But it's important. That's why I found it so important to people realize that there's so many microcultures within the Muslim world and the Arab world. And that's true of all parts of the world. There's always other identities. And so I had to explain, no, I'm Christian. Oh, I didn't know there were Christians in Egypt. And then I would go into what you were asking me, which I'm glad that you did ask me, is about Coptic Orthodox and the history. It's a very, very rich, old history, and you can't really appreciate Egyptian history without that part of it. It's an integral part of it, just like, the Islamic era, just like the pagan, the dynasties. And I think as a Coptic, I have to say we have traditions and beliefs. So, I mean, maybe this kind of can blanket over with other Christians as well who are not Egyptian, but there are things that you're taught to follow and believe and that don't always agree with American culture, like dating, for example. It's not something that's condoned when you're a teenager, you go out and date, but that's not unique to Christian culture. That's Muslim culture in general, protective of girls in particular. So it's hard to separate in that case, but I think that was hard. That's something that troubles a lot of people when they are growing up. I think just the sort of many layers of culture clashes that, it doesn't have to be a problem, but I'm saying it can produce some anxiety or some identity crisis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm Indian, and we didn't date. My parents would never even have thought of me dating. It was like, well, the first person you actually love will probably be after college, and that's the person you'll marry, and that was their assumption. They didn't understand dating is it's part of the culture here. So yeah, I think that's something we have very similar. It probably isn't even just like a Islam Arabic thing. It's in a lot of cultures.
Exactly. It is. And, also, another funny thing is just Christmas and Easter, when we celebrate it as a Coptic Orthodox, it's there was American Christmas, which is the 25th. And so American Christmas, you open presents, but Coptic Christmas, which was January 7th, was church. So that a big thing I wanted to share with you actually that I should have answered before and I forgot is the fasting. Okay. That's a part of our lifestyle as Coptic Christians, if we choose to fast anyway, it's like the majority of the year there's a fast. Like there's probably a very small percentage of the year where you're actually eating meat and cheese and dairy, because the majority of the year, especially during Lent, you're vegan. You are vegan for 55 days prior to so that'll start, I think, in February, that fast.
Wow.
We just finished a fast for Advent, which just ended on January 7th. And we have very specific traditions, breaking the fast at night, the eve of Christmas or the eve of Easter, going to church for midnight mass. These are things that people don't understand when you're growing up here. It's like, oh, how come you can't eat meat or you can't eat this? And so that's a dietary restriction that many households follow and observe. Not everyone, but I don't personally follow it anymore, but I it's very hard with a 3-year-old in the house. But I used to, and it's really hard. And you have to everywhere you go, people around, how should I say, Christmas time are having cookies and buttery cakes, but you're not supposed to have any because it has butter and cookies.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, no milk chocolate, So that's something interesting, right?
And I'm sure even just when people wish you Merry Christmas, right? Or, it's like, well, my Christmas is not till January. And I think that's where people sometimes are like, well, just say Happy Holidays.
Yeah.
But then, people don't understand that there's so many, different holidays going on during that time all around the world. Coptic Orthodox, even the Greek Orthodox, their Christmas is around the same time as the Coptic Orthodox, and then even Hinduism, there's holidays that are happening. So it's just very interesting, that time of the year.
It is. It's very interesting. And I mean, of course, we celebrate it. I mean, I recognize, also it's complicated by the fact that the Orthodox Church has also changed calendar. So they were not all on the same calendar anymore. So the Antiochian Church, which I go to, which is technically not part of the Oriental churches.
Yeah.
They celebrate the 25th. So it's
interesting.
It's hard, it's all Christmas to me. I actually, to be very honest with you, wish it were all one day. It would make it so much easier.
Yeah. Life would be easy. But there would be less fasting, but that's what makes your culture so unique. So this has been so interesting for me, just from historically, we've had some really real conversations, and I appreciate you and the knowledge you have, especially even with language and just all that there is to even a language has so much history. It's super interesting to me. Now we've almost run out of time actually, so I want to try to make this really quick.
Sure.
If there's one wise words that your grandfather or father taught you in your culture, what would that be?
Oh, wow. That my father.
Yeah, just something that, resounds in your head and you just really remember and probably follow.
Always, I think my father definitely showed me. He didn't just teach me. To always try to look at the world through another person's eyes, no matter how hard it is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think our world really needs to hear that right now.
Definitely.
So I love that. That gives me goosebumps, because there was another guest that actually had something very similar, and I just think that's beautiful that those are wise words to be shared. Thank you for that. One last thing is, I always ask how you say I love you in your language. So obviously it'd be Arabic. Mm-hmm. How would you say I love you in Arabic?
So if I'm saying it to you, because you're a lady, بحبك.
بحبك. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I got the.
If I'm saying it to a male, it sounds slightly different. It becomes بحبك.
بحبك. بحبك. بحبك. Oh,
perfect.
Awesome.
So you got it.
This is probably the easiest one so far. So I appreciate you. I thank you so much for coming and just sharing your culture. And to everybody watching and listening, I hope you got cultured today and just learned something new. And just always see the world in someone else's point of view. I think that's important. So thank you, Christine. I appreciate you.
Timbrel.
Have a wonderful day, and بحبك.
بحبك.
Get Cultured is part of the Candy Factory Convo series and is a proud member of the Candy Factory Collective. You can find the show streaming on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and LinkedIn, and you can subscribe to the audio version anywhere you get your podcasts.
Passionate about uplifting people and supporting her community, Timbrel has made it her mission to connect and empower communities of all cultures. She is the founder of the social enterprise eco-sustainable brand Lush Bazaar, which is committed to sustainably made fashion and handcrafted products while providing fair wage jobs. She is also the creator of the Cultured Workshop, which focuses on the education of different cultures and traditions to understand diverse communities. In her downtime, you can find Timbrel traveling to new places or reading a book while sipping hot lemon tea with her dog beside her.
Get Cultured is produced by the Candy Factory Collective at the Candy Factory Co-working Campus in Lancaster, PA. Production support by Jason Mundock and Anna Tran. Administrative support by Ann Kirby, Ariana Henderson, and Krisha Martzel. Notes and links can be found on the show post at our website, candyfactorycollective.com. Candy Factory Collective.